Gyuvo, and welcome back to the channel. My name is David. Today, we're talking about the Canon R5C and really just my thoughts on it, how I feel about it, because I own a C70, and hopefully you learn something that will make you either buy a C70, buy an R5C, buy an R6, or none of these cameras, because I'm not paid by Canon, I'm not sponsored by Canon, and everything that I'm going to show you in this video, I bought with my own money. Like that disclaimer. It was kind of just like segued into that. But yeah, this video is going to be just very raw, unscripted, and I'm just going to tell you kind of like my thoughts on the camera, because I think it's great that we have a camera like this, because we're living in peak camera. Like, this is the year, like these last few years have been like the best years for cameras, and I don't think any camera that has come out in the last few years sucks. I think the people behind the cameras operating may or may not suck, because sometimes they think, oh, I'm going to go buy this new camera that's going to make me look even better, but they don't know jack diddly squat about photography or video. So let's just jump into my thoughts on the R5C. So the R5C is basically Canon's answer to the FX3, which came out, I believe it was last year, like sometime after the A7S III. And essentially Sony rehoused a A7S III internal, like the internals, like the guts, and they put it in a very customizable cinema-like body that has all these mounting points for cages, rigs, and so on and so forth. And basically this camera sits nicely in between the A7S III and their FX6, which I believe is their entry-level cinema camera. And so it kind of fills that void for somebody that wants a cinema camera, but without spending the cinema camera price tag or buying into something that's very expensive. And Canon is essentially doing the same thing here, that sits between the R5 and the C70, which is their RF cinema camera. And I argue this is probably like their entry-level cinema camera, because it's currently, I believe, the cheapest cinema camera that has come out in recent time that you can buy. And it's also the only RF cinema camera. So yeah, I guess you could call it entry-level. And you know, again, the C70 isn't cheap. When I bought it, I paid a little over $6,000. That was with tax included. And I also had to buy 2 V90 cards, because this camera only takes V90 cards. You can't use regular like V30 or 60 cards. Even if you shoot something like 1080p on this camera, which I don't know why you would, you have to use V90 cards because the data rate is so high. So not everyone wants to spend that money. And, you know, I believe the price tag for the R5C was $4,500, and that's much more manageable for a lot of people, especially if, you know, you're already somebody that's very invested in the Canon RF system like I am, or like my friend Adrian, for example, who owns a EOS R6, but finds himself shooting a lot more video now. So this camera is going to potentially fill that void or that need that he has when it comes to doing video. The other cool thing about the R5C is that it can still take pictures. You just flick the switch left or right to go from photo or video mode, and you essentially have an R5. You could still take the same great 45 megapixel images, do all the jazz, and then you need to shoot video, just flick the switch back over to the video side, and you can start shooting unlimited 8K recording thanks to the cooling fan and the removal of the record limit, which I'm happy Canon's finally starting to implement. I really hope they do that on the R6 and the R5 via firmware update, but we'll see. The camera is very capable, and if you work professionally, sometimes you find yourself working with a photographer or a videographer, depending on what you shoot, for a client, because they need both. And essentially this camera is 2 cameras in one. It's like they basically took an R6 or an R5 and played polymerization and fused it with a C70, and you get the EOS R5C. Now, in terms of me being a C70 owner, do I feel like I should go out and buy this camera? Not really. Like, I'm happy with my R6s as my B and C cam, and the times I do have to shoot C-Log 3, the C70 shoots C-Log 3, and so do the R6s, so the colors and everything are going to match. So my setup is pretty much covered for all my needs. I think the main thing that I still think the C70 does better than the C70 is the battery life. And before you say, oh, well, you can use V-mount batteries, I understand that. But I'm thinking of it more of like, if you spend the money on this camera, on either camera, the C70 or the R5C, do you need to go buy extra things to get it ready to use out of the box? And the C70 kind of checks more boxes off for me because my needs are different than your needs. And something like this big battery, this is a small battery. This is the BPA30. I'm currently using the A60 in the C70 that I'm using right now to record this video. But this small battery roughly gives me about 3 hours of use. And mileage may vary because sometimes I'm using an XLR microphone, sometimes I'm using an external display, and that draws power from the camera to basically send the signal to the monitor or audio and all that. So yeah, so the battery life is going to vary. The BPA60 battery gives me roughly about 6 hours of charge. So just either battery alone is just going to give you way better mileage than these dinky little LPE6NH batteries, which I think people were saying on some of their early impressions that the NH battery is only going to give you about roughly 40 minutes of record time for video on the R6, which is not good. It's not bad either. I mean, these are so cheap, you probably already have a bunch of these anyway. This gives me a bit better peace of mind than this. And again, this is just straight out of the box. I'm not saying that you shouldn't go buy one camera or the other. Again, your needs are different than my needs. I'm kind of just giving you my perspective on things. The C70 also has the built-in ND filters, which is fantastic. I don't always have to pack my ND filters if I'm shooting with the C70 because it's built in. Or, you know, you don't want to spend the money on a bigger ND filter because once you start buying into something like an 82 millimeter ND filter, especially the variable ones, you're pushing well over a few $100s, depending on the brand and so on and so forth. The C70 also has like the built-in XLR inputs, which is fantastic. So now you could go and plug into a XLR microphone like what I'm using right now. Or if, let's say, you're shooting something like a wedding at a church, you could plug it into their audio interface and get the audio directly recorded to the camera. You don't have to mic up the groom or whoever's talking, assuming that this place's audio setup is good. I still highly recommend you should always mic your groom if you're shooting weddings because it's just a safety thing. The more audio sources you have, the better. Tip for the day. So yeah, so those are kind of like my thoughts on the why the C70 does things better in some capacities. But some of the other things that the R5C does better than the C70 is that it could shoot RAW internally. You don't need any like peripherals or anything like that. The C70 can't shoot RAW yet, although Canon Rumors is reporting that we might see a RAW update sometime in March, which fingers crossed because that'd be amazing. I probably won't shoot RAW because I can't imagine how much bit rate and data it's going to write to the card, and I only have two 128 gig cards for this camera because they're so expensive. So yeah, but still, if you need RAW, it's there. And the fact that the camera itself is, you know, about the size of this with the fan built in, so it's a little thicker, but still it's a lot smaller and easier to operate. And, you know, for people like us who make videos on YouTube, the R5C will probably be a better choice because we have way more flexibility with it because it is very small. The C70 is more like a 1D style camera with the big built-in vertical grip because, well, not vertical grip, but like the camera is big enough where you could hold it vertically like a 1D style camera. But yeah, again, your needs are very different than my needs and so on and so forth. So am I going to buy the R5C? Probably not, because I'm happy with my R6s as my BNC cam, and that fulfills all my needs. And most of the time, for most shoots, unless it's only specifically dedicated video, I just pack my two R6s with some lenses and we're good to go. This one, for example, I use more for like documentary work or just big commercial gigs where I am going to be shooting a lot of video and I just need something that is just dedicated for video. So as far as like who is the R5C for? Well, it's really for somebody who, again, you probably own a mirrorless camera and you're finding yourself shooting a lot of video, but you don't want to spend the money on a cinema camera or a video only camera because they get expensive. So the R5C will probably cover those bases for you because, again, it is still a photo camera. So if you find yourself also taking photos during a shoot, there you go. You could just swap it over to photo mode and then you could go back to shooting video. And I think the R5C is going to sell well because a lot of video shooters, while they had their complaints about the overheating with the R5, the fact that it is hindered by the record limit and overheating and all that stuff. I think the R5C is just going to be a no-brainer for them. And again, none of the cameras I'm talking about suck, in my opinion. Like, we're at peak camera tech the last few years. And if I shot Sony, I'd probably be saying the same thing about Sony or Nikon, so on and so forth. So I think if you find yourself in kind of like in that middle niche between owning a mirrorless camera and a cinema camera, and you want something that's more of a true hybrid of both, that while it does have compromises, it doesn't really compromise that bad, then I think the R5C is for you. Or if you're say, for example, my friend Adrian, who just wants one camera that could do it all because he shoots on an R6, but he also wants a dedicated camera that could kind of do both. Jack of all trades, master of some is still better than a jack of all trades, master of one. That's the true version, not the whole jack of all trades, master of none. Look it up. But yeah, so essentially the R5C is kind of like the Swiss Army knife camera. It's going to fill so many needs for so many people. It's also small enough where you could throw it on a gimbal and still use it as a gimbal camera. You're not going to get the wobble because it lacks IBIS. And you can still use cinema lenses on it if you wanted to. If you have that kind of money, go for it. And it's also a good camera for crash kits. If you're shooting a Hollywood production or some sort of production where you just have to crash a car and the camera's going to get completely destroyed. Hey, $4,500 is a lot cheaper than spending, close to 10 G's on a cinema camera that you're just going to basically destroy. So yeah, so there's that as well. Well, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I hope you found it helpful. I kind of just wanted to make this impromptu video because I just wanted to share my thoughts on the R5C. Hopefully it helped you out. And maybe I'll do a much more formal review, or not a review, but much more formal, more informed video at some point on the R5C. So again, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate your time. Go ahead and get the video a thumbs up if you liked it. If you disliked it, double tap the thumbs down button twice. Trust me, it works. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Hasta luego.